Hey everybody, Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here. We've got a new potential tropical cyclone, so a new tropical system to track. And before you get carried away with what the heck is a potential tropical cyclone, we've talked a lot about this the last couple of years, but remember, any one of these systems is considered a tropical cyclone anywhere in the world if it's a closed circulation warm core over warm water. What's different is that if we have a system like that over the Atlantic, Eastern, and Central Pacific, it gets called a hurricane. In the Western Pacific, it's called a typhoon. In the Indian Ocean, South Pacific, it's called a cyclone. But the overarching technical meteorological term, they're all tropical cyclones. So that's why you see that term. So let's get right to the details. We won't focus too much on that, but I know there's always a little bit of confusion. So here's our track. Potential Tropical Cyclone 4. Another way to think about this is future tropical storm Debby, because we anticipate it becoming Debby. Now, this is the forecast cone. We expect it to be somewhere in the Eastern Gulf, over Florida, and some impact on the Carolinas. Now, one word of caution with the cone. Remember, the cone is where the center could be, not where the impacts are going to be. So theoretically, the center could be as far west as here or as far east as here. But remember, that's just the center. If it's a big system, the impacts could be well off here and well off to here. So always remember that. This is not showing you where the worst weather is going to be, but where the center could be. So give or take, several hundred miles on either side of this for words of caution. We haven't had a hurricane hunter in there. We don't have a defined system yet because it's still potential system. So when you look at models, don't get too carried away, though they are coming more in line with what we've been thinking here the last couple of days. And I'll show you the spaghetti plots, or what we call the model tracks. They're actually pretty consistent right now. And I think part of that reason is we've had a couple model runs where the center has been at least designated. Not that we know that's where the center is, but when you do an investigation area or you define a system, at least you have a starting point, right? To calculate something. You have some math you can do. Now, the hurricane hunters will likely head out there when it's not over Cuba and give us some data. But the time frame we're looking at is probably Sunday over the Florida Keys, something developing. And you get the idea. They're clustered pretty tightly together over Florida and then off the coast of the Carolinas. I like looking at ensembles because this is a better way to look at it. Instead of focusing on one single model run, you kind of look at the average. And I'll be honest with you, the average model run, the mean, is always going to outperform one individual model. It just does. It's just more accurate. So you get the idea here. It's pretty clear that we've got the Bermuda High off the East Coast. We've got a trough of low pressure digging in. So there's a window here, but that window, you don't know where that churn's going to happen. It could technically churn here. It could stay over Cuba longer, which is a weaker system, by the way. And a weaker system will actually be impacted more by the low-level steering currents than the mid-level steering currents. And so what I mean by that is the intensity actually helps dictate the track. Because as a storm becomes stronger and vertically stacked, more levels of the atmosphere influence it. When it's a weak system, that means it's kind of at the bottom of the atmosphere. And so the steering currents at the surface are more important than the upper levels. So the strength of the storm is actually pretty important. And that's actually one of the weaknesses we have in forecasting. We do an amazing job, believe it or not. I think it's very underrated how good the track forecasts are. We still have uncertainty in the intensity, how strong the system is going to be, because there's just things internally in the storm that are hard to model and actually hard to forecast. So that's something to watch. How strong does this system get? And we're thinking about how strong this system is going to get. You kind of got to look, basically at the temperatures in the Atlantic. So here's a view of the track, and you can see how warm the water is in the Eastern Gulf and off the coast of Florida. So if the track, let's say, ends up staying over water longer off the coast of Florida, it could become a much stronger system. If it stays closer to the coast, it would be a weaker system. But the difference in those tracks is minute. It's well within the margin of error in any forecast. So that's why if you're in Florida, you got to pay super close attention. Then when it makes this churn, how long does it stay over land? Does it get back over water sooner? So a track here could be stronger for the Carolinas versus a track more inland. So those are the things we got to pay attention to. There's a lot of uncertainty in that track, which is going to cause some issues with the intensity. So going forward, one thing I would be very cautious with is how this thing churns, how strong it is going to have a lot of dictating on the impacts it's going to have. One thing I know for sure, it's going to produce rain. We 100% chance we're going to see heavy rain along the track of this. What we don't know is the wind and surge potential, and that's all going to be determined on the track and intensity of the system. So you can see our trough in the water vapor loop. You see our ridge of high pressure here. So that window is there. Florida is always a tough thing because it's like this. It's a peninsula. You know, a track that moves east or west a little bit could be the difference between going over Florida or not going over Florida. So sometimes the shape and geography of the state of Florida makes the forecast more difficult than it actually seems. You could be off by percent, 1 or 2%, and that's the difference between offshore and onshore, and you get into all kinds of issues. So we've got time to watch it. If you're anywhere in the southeast, that includes anybody in the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida, you need to pay attention. You've got time to watch this. I'm not overly concerned with the strong system, but you can't write that off. I would say the biggest thing I would prepare for right now is heavy rain, flash flooding, and heavy rain. Secondary impact, power outages, especially in Florida, because it looks like it could be a tropical storm with enough wind to cause power outages. I'll quickly take a look at the rain forecast from the system. So just a quick glance at the rainfall forecast, you could see most of the yellow is between 4 and 6 inches of rain, but even back towards Charlotte, you're in the 1 to 2. And again, remember the track is super crucial here. This gradient of a little bit of rain to a whole bunch of rain could shift this way, or it could shift this way with subtle changes in the track. And if it slows down, which there are some hints that it might get trapped or kind of get stuck down there, then the totals could increase dramatically. So the highest confidence in the forecast right now is in this. We're going to see heavy rain in parts of the southeast. The uncertainty and the lack of confidence is in the intensity, which means wind and surge potential. So stay weather aware in the southeast, but we've got time to watch this. By Sunday, we're going to have a really good idea on what's happening here. So you get all weekend to kind of prepare in Florida and the Carolinas. You have until early next week, really Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday timeframe, probably when we're going to see some of the biggest impacts here in the Carolinas. Of course, I'll post updates throughout the weekend. Have a great Friday and stay tuned for more updates.